Now that we have covered the different parts of the Data Entity Designer, let's go ahead and begin defining custom entities. To begin defining a custom entity, click the Add Entity button. This opens the new entity page where we will enter the information for our custom entity. Let's enter the name of our entity in the Display Name text box. The display name specifies the name that shows for the custom entity in AgilePoint. The name that is entered in the display name will also be entered for the plural name and the internal name. The plural name specifies the name that shows for the custom entity when there is more than one. This is the plural version of the entity name. For example, the name we entered in the display name is customer, so the plural name would be customers. The internal name specifies a unique technical name for the custom entity. The internal name becomes the actual name of the database that is created in the system for this entity. The internal name is not limited to what is entered in the display name. As long as the custom entity has not been saved, the name can be changed. Once the entity has been saved, the internal name can no longer be changed. Next is the description. This specifies a text description for your custom entity. Entering a description is optional and not required to create an entity, and can therefore be left blank. All these fields come with help text. Hovering the cursor over the help icon will display the help text. Next is category. This specifies a data entity category for your custom entity to be associated with. Clicking the Category Select box will display a drop-down list of the available categories you can select from. For this demo, we will select Sales from the list. Next is Record Display Name. This specifies the display name for the field that uniquely identifies a record in your entity. This field is equivalent to a primary key in a database. When you create a custom entity, the value for the Record Display Name field is the name that appears in the AgilePoint UI for identifying this field. Let's enter a name in the Record Display Name text box. The name that is entered for the Record Display Name will also be entered for the record internal name as well. The record internal name specifies a unique technical name for the Record Display Name field. This is simply a technical identifier and not a separate field from the record display name. The record internal name is not limited to what was entered in the record display name. As long as the custom entity has not been saved, the name can be changed. Once the entity has been saved, the record internal name can no longer be changed. The record internal field type specifies the type of data that can be accepted in the record display name field. Clicking the Select box displays a drop-down list of the available field types. They are Sequence Number, GUID, and Text. For this demo, we will select Text for the field type. Next is Record Description. This specifies a text description for your record. Entering a description is optional and not required to create an entity, and can therefore be left blank. Next is Publish Status. This specifies if your entity is still under development or ready to be used. By clicking the switch, you can change the status of your entity. Draft means that your entity is under development and not accessible. Published means your entity has been deployed and is accessible by others. For this demo, we will select the Published status. Next is Record Limit. This specifies the number of records you want to retrieve from your entity when a view or an API call is made. The default number entered is 1000, but you have the option of entering a custom number. Then you have Active. This specifies whether an entity can be used by an application. Clicking the switch off enables the entity to be viewed or changed in Data Entities, but not available in the App Builder. Clicking the switch on enables the entity to be used in an application. The switch is set to on by default. Next is Use the default event logging for AgilePoint applications. This specifies the audit level to track and store events that occur for the custom entity. Clicking the switch on enables the tracking and storing all of the events that occur for this entity. By clicking the switch off, you will be disabling tracking and no events will be stored for the entity except normal error logging for your application. For this demo, we will switch it on. Then you have entity permissions. This specifies who can change the custom entity. Clicking the switch to Enabled allows all users who have access the ability to change the custom entity. Clicking the switch to Disabled allows only the users with System Administrator and Entity Owner roles the ability to change the custom entity. For this demo, we will enable permissions. Next is the Export-Import options. This provides options to configure the export-import features for the entity. The Allow Entity Model Export specifies which users can export an entity model. Clicking the switch on allows all users that have access the ability to export the entity model. Clicking the switch off allows only system administrators and the entity owner the ability to export the entity model. For this demo, we will set the switch to on. The Allow Entity Model Import specifies which user can import an entity model into the AgilePoint NX data entities. Clicking the switch on allows all users who have access the ability to import the entity model. Clicking the switch off allows only system administrator and entity owner the ability to import the entity model. For this demo, we will set the switch to on. Next is Allow Record Export. This specifies which users can export the records from an entity. Clicking the switch on allows all users who have access the ability to export the entity records. Clicking the switch off allows only system administrator and entity owner the ability to export the entity records. For this demo, we will set the switch to on. The last option is Allow Record Import. This specifies which users can import records to an entity. Clicking the switch on allows all users who have access the ability to import records to an entity. Clicking the switch off allows only the system administrator and entity owner the ability to import records to an entity. For this demo, we will set the switch to on. With all the information entered for our custom entity, click the Create Entity button. This creates our custom entity and associates it with the sales category and the custom type. It also has one custom field that was defined when creating the custom entity, and this field is unique. Every entity by default has 5 standard fields. These are created by, created date, ID, last modified by, and last modified date. These fields are all locked. This is indicated by the lock icon. This means that these fields cannot be changed or deleted. To display and review the information that was entered for this custom field and entity, click the Details tab. To edit the information, click the Edit button. This opens all the fields that are allowed for editing. For example, the display name can be changed, but the internal name cannot be changed. This is because the internal name was used to name the database table for this entity. When you have finished editing the fields, click the Back button. Now let's add more fields to our custom entity. To begin, click the Fields tab. Then, in the Fields menu, click Add Field. This displays the new field window where you can choose from the available fields. The available fields are sequence number, Boolean, date, date time, decimal, email, GUID, numeric, percentage, phone, pick list, range, rich text, text, text area, URL, and yes/no. The first field we will add is email. Click on email to select it, then click the Next button. Clicking Next displays the selected field type window for the email field. Let's enter email in the display name text box, and then press the Tab key. The name that is entered for the display name will also be entered for the internal name. The internal name is the unique technical name for the entity field. The description is to add a description for your entity field. The description is not required and can therefore be left blank. You can enter custom values for the fields in the field configuration section or leave the default settings. For this demo, we will leave the fields as their default values. Then we'll click the Save and New button, so we can add more custom fields without closing the new field window. For the next field, select Phone and click Next. In the selected field type window for the phone field, enter Phone for the display name and the internal name. We will leave the field configuration section as their default values. Click the Save and New button to continue entering fields. The next field we will select is Text Area. Enter address for the display name and the internal name. Click the Save and New button. Click Text for the next field. Enter City for the display name and internal name. Click the Save and New button. For our last field, we will also select the text field. Enter State for the display name and the internal name. Since this is the last custom field for our entity, we will click the Save button. This saves our fields and closes the new field window. With our fields saved successfully, they will be listed in the Custom Fields tab of our entity. To delete a custom field, click the Delete icon to the right of the field you wish to delete. To delete a custom entity, click Delete Entity in the Entity menu. This will delete the custom entity along with any custom fields that have been defined. Clicking the submenu will display a drop-down list giving you the option to clone entity. This creates a copy of an entity. Export Template will download a template from AgilePoint to your local machine either as an XML or JSON file. Export Data will download records from the entity to your local machine as an XML or JSON file. And Import Data uploads exported records from your local machine and adds them to an entity in AgilePoint. We can also manually add data or records to our entity database. To add records, click the Data tab. This will list all the records that have been entered in the database for this entity. To add a record to the database, click Add Data in the Data menu. This opens the new data window where you can enter information in the custom fields that we have defined for this entity. Let's enter a name, an email address, a phone number, a street address, a city, and a state. Now we will click the Save button. This will save the record and close the new data window. You can see the record has been saved to the custom entity. By being able to create records right from your browser, you do not need to use SQL to enter records into the database tables of your custom entities. By clicking on the submenu to the left of your record, you have the ability to view and edit the record, or clone the record, or delete the record. Let's click the View and Edit option. This opens the Data Details window where you can review the information. By clicking the Edit button, you can edit the information contained in the record. When you have finished editing the record, click the Save button to save the changes. Clicking the Back button exits you out of Edit mode and returns you to View mode. To close the Data Details window, click the X in the upper right corner of the window. With this entity complete, let's define a child entity. Click the Entities tab in the toolbar on the left to return to the Entities page. From there, click on the Add Entity button. On the new entity page, let's enter the display name and press the Tab key. This will enter the plural name and the internal name as well. From the category drop-down list, select Sales. Let's enter the name of the record display name and press the Tab key to also enter the record internal name. For the record internal field type, select Sequence Number from the drop-down list. Select Published for the status. Click the switch to On to create detailed audit logs for this entity. Click the switch On to enable permissions. We'll turn on all export-import options. And now click the Create Entity button. This will create our new custom entity and field. Let's add additional fields. Click Add Field in the Entity menu. Select Date from the New Field window and click Next. Enter a display name and the internal name. Click the Save and New button. Select Numeric from the field list and click the Next button. Enter a display name and the internal name. Click the Save and New button. Now select Decimal from the list and click the Next button. Enter a display name and the internal name. Click the Save and New button. Select Decimal again and click the Next button. Enter a display name and the internal name. Click the Save and New button. Select Text from the list and click the Next button. Enter a display name and the internal name. Click the Save button to save the last custom field and to close the new field window. Now let's create a child-parent relationship between this entity and the one we defined earlier. To begin, click the Relationships tab. Then click Add Relationship in the Relationships menu. This will open the new relationship window. Let's enter a name in the Name text box. The name that is entered in the text box is the name of the entity that will be the child of this relationship. For example, the entity that we want as a child is the entity that we initiated the relationship from, or the order history entity. So that is the name we will enter in the Name text box, but with no spaces. Next is Parent Entity. This specifies the parent entity with which to create a relationship. For example, in this demo, the name specifies the child entity, which is order history of the child-parent relationship. So the parent entity will be the name of the entity that we want as the parent of the child-parent relationship, which is the customer entity we designed earlier. So the parent entity is customer and the child entity is order history. Clicking the parent entity select box will display a drop-down list of all the custom and standard entities. We will select customer from the list. Next is the parent primary field. This specifies the entity field with which you want to create a relationship. In the parent entity, we want to use one of the primary keys in the database table. There is an ID field and a field that we defined when creating the entity called name that can be used as the primary key. Clicking the Parent Primary Field select box displays a drop-down list with ID and name. For this demo, we will select ID. Next is the child field display name. This displays the name that is shown in AgilePoint for the relationship. Let's enter a name in the child field display name text box and press the Tab key. The name that is entered for the child field display name will also be entered for the child field name, but with no spaces. The name entered in the child field name text box becomes a field in the child entity database table that has a foreign key relationship with the ID field in the parent entity database table. Click the Save button to save the relationship and close the new relationship window. The new relationship will now be listed in the Relationship tab. Let's click the Entities tab in the toolbar on the left to return to the Entities page. Here you can see the two custom entities that we have defined listed in the Custom category. If we click on one of the custom entities, you can see all the custom fields that have been defined along with the standard fields. If you want to mark an entity as favorite, click the star icon next to the entity name. This will add the entity to the Quick Links Entities section in the Quick Launch bar on the Data Entities homepage. Let's click the Home tab in the toolbar on the left and review some of the statistics that will be displayed now that the custom entities have been created. On the Data Entities homepage, we can see that we now have 2 custom entities listed, along with the standard entities. Going to the Quick Links Entities section in the Quick Launch bar, we can see the entities that we marked as favorite. Clicking on the entity will open that entity and display the custom and standard fields. From here, we can click on the field to open the details window for that field. And by clicking the Edit button, you can change the display name or you can enter a description for that field. With your custom entities defined, they are now ready to be used in your applications.